Good morning. Getting things heated up here, so I hope I can bring some energy to you this morning. I spent a good part of this year studying the ski and mountain travel markets, and am really excited to share this with you. This was interesting stuff to study. With the support of generous sponsors, we conducted a large-scale survey of people who are based in the US who took ski and mountain trips throughout the year between February 24 and February of 2025. These were all overnight trips. It included a robust sample of people who traveled for winter sports specifically, and importantly, a sample of people who went from the US to Europe. So today I'll talk to you both about the general market in the US to give a sense of the market opportunity, as well as some insights about people who went to Europe specifically, so that you have a sense of the preferences of people who are coming there. So let's start with some demographics and some big facts about these US mountain travelers. About 10% of the US overnight leisure travelers did some kind of winter sports holiday over their past year of travel. Given our studies about the size of the US leisure travel market, that translates to about 16.7 million people who had taken an overnight trip for winter sports in the past year, and they spent during the course of that year a whopping $85 billion, which is a number inclusive of purchases on things like travel components, like air, rail, or accommodation, as well as costs for activities, things like lift tickets, gear rentals, lessons, and in-destination purchases like food and beverage or shopping. The main states that people come from within the United States tend to be the ones that are most populous within the country itself. So we see the most representation from areas like California, New York, Florida, or Texas. And these are people who are also very distinct in terms of the attitudes they carry. 75% of them consider themselves more physically active than the average person. 68% of people who had gone on a winter sports trip said that they like to challenge their physical limits on winter sports vacations. Yes, relaxation can be important for them, but they're distinct from other holiday goers in the sense that it's truly not just about kicking back and relaxing, but also getting a sense of challenge in that physical activity. We really wanted to get a strong sense of the psychology of destination selection, both how they chose to go to the mountains at all, but also specific towns or cities to stay in, and how somebody might choose to leave the United States and come to destinations in Europe. Just to give a sense of how many people are going abroad, we saw 39% of US mountain travelers leave the United States on the most recent trip. And I'll give you a picture of the markets that they're going to most commonly. The most popular one was the US neighbor, Canada, and that was especially popular for people who traveled for winter sports compared to those who traveled in summer and shoulder season. However, the next most common markets were all European. France was the most popular of those, especially for people who traveled for those winter sports. And you'll see that some of these European markets are places you may recognize as having more lifts than others, but keep in mind some of these are multi-destination trips where people connect things like airport arrivals or other activities throughout countries, and this makes a lot of sense when you see that many of the European markets over here are adjacent to one another, so very easy to connect those trips with places that have more prominent skiing and those that don't. In terms of the opportunity to get those US travelers to go to new destinations, from the people who went to Europe, we saw that 43% sat down to plan the trip with a single place that they wanted to go to. That's a difficult group to convince to go somewhere new if you're trying to attract that new consumer. However, you still get about half that began the process with a short list of where they wanted to go, and that's where a lot of opportunity lies to convince them. I'll note that it's pretty uncommon for people to sit down with truly no idea of where they're going to head. So very important to think about those long-term marketing plans to make sure that any destination you're representing is really in that consideration shortlist when they sit down to make the plan, as well as short-term strategies as well to help them narrow down places among one another when they're choosing within their shortlist. And something tricky about these mountain travelers that go to Europe is if they started with a shortlist and they wound up in Europe, they were overwhelmingly likely to consider a destination that was not necessarily the mountains. 70% of those who started with the short list and went to Europe said that they considered a different destination setting, like a beach or ocean, attractions or theme parks, or lakes and rivers. The bottom line here is that the mountains do not only compete with the mountains, and you really have to sell the destination setting in addition to selling specific destinations themselves. Something else that's very interesting about this population is that looking more generally at the US winter sports overnight travelers, their expertise in their sports has a very strong skew towards people who are more intermediate or advanced. Only 7% of those US winter sports travelers said that they were a beginner or novice, a 1 or 2 out of 5 within their sport. And even between the people who describe themselves as more intermediate versus more advanced or expert in their sports, we see a lot of differences in both attitudes and behaviors. So the industry is really going to have to continue. It's something they're already thinking about. It's something they'll need to continue to think about. But how do you increase this pipeline and get people to these higher comfort levels within the sport, whether it's making sure you market to families and get more people to try this as children, or you get more adults sold on the idea of incorporating winter sports into overnight trips, even if they're beginners. And part of the reason that pipeline is so relevant is because people who are advanced or expert in their athletic capacities are much more likely to go abroad, and that includes Europe as a much higher likelihood. It's attracting people who feel much more competent in their athletic abilities, and so thinking about both how to market them, but also how to escalate people in their own comfort level with their athletic abilities are both important for the future marketing potential of the sport and attracting people from the United States. Perhaps as a result of that disproportionate number of people who are advanced or expert athletes who are coming to Europe, we see that if people leave the United States for skiing, there are some very different styles that they'll practice abroad. We see less downhill skiing from people who leave the United States and more of just about every other style. So that includes some interesting things like freestyle, it includes cross-country, both skate and classic, and even some of the more niche sides of skiing like backcountry, heli skiing, or cat skiing are all more common among people who leave the United States to go to Europe versus those who stay domestic only. Many people within the industry also theorize that the season passes that the United States has and that are included with some resorts internationally, included in Europe, really push people to also leave the country because they don't have to purchase individual lift tickets. Now, while we do see that the about 2 in 3 people who go to Europe from the US for winter sports do hold season passes, it's not something that's cited as a major reason why they decided to leave the United States. So keep in mind, this is something that could sweeten the deal. It's something that makes it better, but it's not really the main reason they're going. So the question that follows that is, what is the main reason they're going? And I would break it down into 3 main categories of items. One is to really increase the quality of the conditions that they're skiing or snowboarding under. So things like better weather or better snow conditions are important there. The second bucket of things that I would call out is feeling like they're getting more value for the money. And this did not rank as one of the top reasons that all the international travelers from the US for winter sports would have left. However, for Europe, it was ranking more highly, which is a good thing to see because it's known for us in the industry that you do get better value outside the United States compared to the winter sports trips in the US. That means it's either reaching the right people in terms of who the message is landing with, that it's more resonant, or that they're finding that they believe more, that you really do get better value in Europe compared to the United States. Then the third bucket of reasons why people really leave the US for these types of trips has to do with elevating the cultural experience with things like the food and beverage scene, experiencing another culture, or experiencing another ski culture. That being said, this is an industry that certainly has its sustainability concerns. The people who go to Europe from the United States show a lot of concern about both climate change and over-tourism and crowding affecting their future trips. They're more concerned about this than the types of people who just stay in the US. And interestingly, they show really similar concern about both issues, the overcrowding as well as climate change affecting their future. So, this is something where we have a lot of reasons to feel optimistic. The mountain travelers from the US go to the mountains for recurring trips within the season. They show that they're willing to spend quite a bit of money, and they're coming to Europe for the value that they get for these winter sports vacations just as often as they're coming for things like the food and beverage scene or the ski culture. However, this is also an industry that has its challenges. Mountain destinations mountain geographies are notoriously difficult to develop in, and that can lead to some pretty high prices as demand scales up, as well as overcrowding as demand scales up as well. If you're interested in learning more about this, scan the QR code. We'll be publishing reports on this in the summer. We'll also be conducting this study again in 2026 if you're interested in contacting us about working with us one-on-one about how this data fits your business needs. But if what caught your ear here was the issues of overcrowding or over-tourism, Rod Cuthbert will be coming up with a panel of experts to discuss this next. So stay in your seats, and thank you.